while Jim was explaining that, I already put caller Wes from the Middle East live on the show. Wes doesn't know if atheists or theists talk about the origin of the universe. So welcome, Wes. How are you?
Yes. Hi, Matt. How are you? And who is with you, please?
Jim.
This is Hi, I'm Jim.
Jim. Oh, hi.
Or at least I was when I woke up this morning. There's the whole ship of Theseus problem.
I got you both on the show today. Yeah, I just wanted to share with you some ideas. Like, I'm all the time thinking, what is the minus infinity?
Huh?
Yeah, what is the minus?
I'm sorry, I lost the plot.
And then, yeah, I say, I'm asking, what is the minus infinity? In the numerical numbers. In the
minus sign of the lazy 8.
We have minus infinity.
Okay, so I would argue that I don't think that's a coherent concept because, and a lot of people get this wrong and it plays havoc. I just listened to a debate the other day where they were talking about infinity and possible infinity and actual infinity and all this other stuff. Infinity is not a quantity at all.
I agree.
Infinity
Correct.
Is a concept that describes an endless quantity. It's something, you know, you can approach infinity, you can't ever attain an actual infinity. And because of that, while you could start at 0 and say every positive integer goes on, and that represents infinity because there's no end to it. But it is one directionally infinite because it starts at 0. And then if you did like the whole number line, you could say, it's infinite in the negative direction and infinite in the positive direction. And so now it's got bidirectional infinity. And isn't that infinity bigger than the other infinity? And the answer, despite being a contradiction, is yes, some infinities are larger than others. But the fact is they don't end and you can't achieve them.
Right. And there's an infinite number of numbers in between any two numbers, no matter how close they are. So like I said, I don't understand the question. I lost the plot or your
about the word.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah. I'm saying if we are talking about the origin of the word and we are talking 0, and we are going from 0, -1, -2, till the minus infinity. And if we start from 0, +1, +2, +3, plus infinity. So this makes me all the time think that the word might have no origin. And it was there. And it is when we recognize it, which is the 0.
But you already did a problem. You already have an error there just in what you said based on what you said previously. You can't add an infinity. You can only add quantities. And if infinity isn't a quantity, then you can't add it.
I'm not adding or subtracting.
You literally said
I'm saying.
Okay.
The words you said we're interpreting as saying you added numbers to infinity.
Yes. If I start from 0, +1, +2, +3, and that goes to the plus infinity. And if I'm at 0 and
okay,
go ahead.
You're talking about on the number line, 0 to infinity. Okay,
but it's not a number line that is 0. No. It is not a number line that is 0 to infinity because that implies that there's something attainable. It's something that approaches infinity but never gets there because infinity is not a quantity. So you can't go +1, +2, +3 plus infinity.
Exactly.
You can't go +1, +2, +3 to infinity. You could do +1, +2, +3 towards infinity.
Thank you for outpedanting me, Mike Mermat. I appreciate that.
I don't understand what the point is.
Yeah.
Yeah. My point is that maybe the word has no start. And all the time, I think why the people all the time argue and fight about the origin of the word and why all the time they fight that there should be a creator.
Okay. What word are people arguing and fighting over? Because I don't recall any fights over the word infinity.
No. I'm not talking about the infinity. I'm talking about the origin of the word that the people insist.
Oh, the origin of the world.
Creator.
The origin of the world. Universe.
Right. Well, that's because
I thought he was saying the origin of the word infinity.
Yeah, I thought so too. Okay.
No. The word itself.
Why were we spending any time talking about infinity if really we want to talk about why are people arguing over whether over the origin of the universe?
No, because this is how I sometimes think about it, that it might have no start. I consider that the minus infinity is coming from the no start, and it goes to the no end.
Okay, so I think I see your confusion. So when we say the world has an origin, or the universe has an origin, we're talking about the origin not only of physical three-dimensional space, but also time. And so we can go back to that 0th instant of time and go forward. But to say we can go backwards past that point, your number line towards the negative infinity, makes no sense, because we're only talking about that in the sense of time. And that may not make any sense before that 0th moment, or that 0 plus 0.1 moment, or whatever you wanted to determine that beginning. It may make no sense to say before the beginning of the universe, because before indicates time exists, and time may not exist at all. There may be no negative time, in other words. And to use your number line example, no negative time in terms of you thinking of it as a number line.
I love it, Jim. Yes, I agree with you. The other thing is when the people also talk about the God. I don't understand this thing because when they talk, or I have conversations with people that say God told me to do so and so, this is a feeling that this person cannot take the responsibility about his own words or his own decisions or his own things.
I agree. Wes, I agree with you that is what is happening from our perspective, but you can't demonstrate that. You can't show that God didn't tell them something.
Fine, but sometimes I tell them that why don't you take the credit and say that my ethics did not allow me to do so and so, or like my morals didn't allow me to do so and so, and all the time you relate that to something, a third person or to a third thing that you created in your mind.
Now you can't do that.
Relate those.
Oh no, he's not saying that, Matt. He's saying he doesn't understand why people do it.
No, he said he's telling them.
Oh, he's telling. Oh, you're telling.
Why would you give that credit to a third person that you created in your mind? Please prove that they created that entity in their mind. I don't know how you can do that.
Exactly, this is what nobody can do. But
well, then why would you tell somebody?
That
now, Wes, you're telling someone that they invented God in their mind, and I'm saying, when I say you can't prove that, you're just agreeing with me. So if you agree with me that you cannot prove that they made up God in their mind, why would you tell them they made up God in their mind?
Based on reaction from me, that when all the time I hear from them that God told me to do so and so, instead of saying like my ethics didn't allow me, or my ethics allows me to do so and so.
No, Wes.
Why this concept is not working for me?
Wes, God told me to hang up on you. Can you prove that didn't happen?
No.
Then would you tell me?
No.
If I say God told me to hang up on you, would you tell me why wouldn't you just say you want to hang up on me instead of using the God that you invented? Would you say anything like that?
Sometimes I do. I say, why don't you tell me that you decided so and so?
Because I didn't decide. God told me to do it.
So, Wes, are you trying to ask the question, why are people blaming God instead of themselves for their actions? Is that the question you're trying to ask?
I'm going there.
Why are people? Why? Okay. So let me rephrase it to be sure. Why are people blaming God for their actions instead of themselves? That's your question.
Yes.
No idea.
And here's the thing. if the question is, why are people blaming God for their actions? How did you reach the conclusion that they are not actually convinced that God is responsible for them, for this guidance? If I say, God told me to hang up on you, and you say, well, why aren't you taking responsibility for your actions instead of giving credit to God? My answer is, because God told me to hang up on you. How could you possibly prove that I'm not accurately relaying what happened?
Right. Yeah, when you say what Matt just said, one of the things that kicks in is human obstinacy, which is also known as a cognitive. What's the word I'm looking for? Shoot, I hate getting old. Pardon?
Dissonance?
No, it's a cognitive behavior. It's something that kicks in automatically when somebody directly opposes an idea you have. You have a tendency to want to dig in and believe it anymore, and that is essentially what you're doing when you say that directly. So it's better to ask the question, well, how do you know that? And that gets around that human obstinacy fact that humans have a tendency to do when they have an idea they strongly believe in that's directly opposed. They will dig in. So it's better to get around that just by asking the question, well, how do you know that God did that? How would you differentiate this from, say, a devil or a demon or whatever else they believe that would be negative, and get around it? But if you're asking for
if somebody says, God told me that, and your response is to suggest God didn't tell you that, now you've adopted a burden of proof that you can't meet. So instead, you should ask a question like Jim said, how do you know it was God that told you to do this?
I have an example. Like, kids. I have kids, and when they were little, they had their imaginary friend that they were playing with, and I was worrying about that a little bit. And then the psychiatrist told me that when they grow up, that will diminish and that will go away, and they will be more realistic, so they will not play with that imaginary friend. And
but they don't think God is imaginary.
And play.
That's the problem. You have adults that don't believe God is imaginary.
I'm getting to a point like this. Okay. Like sometimes people go to and say that, oh, those guys like are schizophrenics. They have schizophrenia. So why we treat the people that have imaginary friends as schizophrenics?
How did you determine? How did you determine that
we have all the people around us?
Stop.
Continue. Go ahead.
Stop, Wes. How did you determine it's an imaginary friend?
Because they were playing with them in their room.
Because what? Hello?
Making sense?
We didn't hear any of that. How did you determine that it was an imaginary friend?
Because the kid was playing in the room and there was nobody else in the room.
How do you know that?
Reality says so.
No, reality doesn't say so.
Okay. So who the kid was playing with?
I don't know. I wasn't there and I didn't get to talk to the kid. I'm pointing out the limitations of asserting that something is not in fact true.
Yeah, but if that continues with the person and he grows up with something like this, the parents take him to the psychiatrist in order to resolve that problem. Is that true or no?
If a child continues to play with an imaginary friend that you believe to be imaginary and you take him to a psychologist, then you may be doing the right thing there if there's a psychological problem. But that I don't see how this is coming back to a believer.
It's different?
With the God claim, yeah, it kind of is.
I feel that it is the same thing. I feel it is the same thing.
The only reason that it is different is because we have studied imaginary friends and know when people grow out of them and know what their characteristics are. And so a diagnosis that a child is playing with an imaginary friend is one that is derived from data about other people who have had imaginary friends that go away. Later in life, they acknowledge they were imaginary. Can we ever prove that they were imaginary? No. But that's not the same as we're talking about the belief in an actual governing, creating entity that exists outside of space and time, a belief shared by the overwhelming majority of people who've ever lived. My only point is, if they say God told them, the correct follow-up response is to get to, how do you know that? How do you know that this God that you're pointing to is actually real? Because if instead you take the position of that ain't real, now you have adopted a burden of proof that you cannot meet. How can you prove that God isn't real?
Okay, I cannot prove, I cannot disprove.
So if you can't prove something and somebody comes to you and they say, I talked to God last night and he told me that you were lonely and in need of some conversation. Now, you can say, I wasn't lonely and I wasn't in need of conversation, so either you're wrong or God's wrong. But if it turns out that you, like everybody else, were lonely and in need of conversation, you could also say, hey, right now we're in a global pandemic where people are stuck at home. Of course, a lot of people are lonely. That's not a particularly impressive thing. How can I know that you're actually hearing from God? All of those prompt a conversation that get to the nature of evidence and what you can prove and what you can't prove. But if you go, why don't you take responsibility for the fact that you just wanted to call me and stop giving credit to your imaginary friend? You have now made an accusation against that person that they are being dishonest, and that you can't, you have a reasonable conclusion that they're dishonest. And if you simultaneously acknowledge that you can't prove that, aren't you making a big mistake to assert that something is so when you can't demonstrate it? Because isn't that exactly what they're doing that you're objecting to?
I have an example. I have a friend who is an adult, and he used to go to church, and we started all these conversations with him. And at one day, and he started to look into science more, and he didn't know anything about the cosmos or about the planets, about all those things. And I asked him the question, do you know what you know? He said, yes. I say, do you know what you don't know? He said, yes. I say, do you know what you don't know? And here where that opened in him something, and he started to dig more and more in science, and he stopped to believe in certain things that he believed in before, like religions and other things. And then he started to tell me that, you know what, really, I feel now that the God that I had or believed in, it was something imaginary, because
so
what? More responsibilities.
Wes, I asked a specific question about adopting a burden of proof and making accusations about a burden of proof. The fact that you can give me a story of someone that changed their mind is completely irrelevant, as you are talking to someone who changed their mind.
Two people.
This is two people. This is all about what sort of claims you are making to a person. Because if you are making a claim that accuses them of something that is exactly the same thing that you're accusing of, how is that not hypocritical? And if you give me an example, like you just did,
okay,
you didn't go to your friend and say, your God is imaginary. Instead, you went through a process of getting them to evaluate the claim on their own. You basically, in response to my question about burden of proof and being hypocritical, gave me an example of doing it the right way. I agree.
Yeah, it came from himself that he found out that
no,
about certain things.
No, Wes. Yeah. The fact that he is now convinced that it came from himself does not mean that he's correct. The fact that I no longer think that I was in the presence of the Holy Spirit does not tell us whether or not I was. This is an absolute failure of skepticism. You have this notion that God is fake, and you're willing to go assert that notion when you can't demonstrate. And then when somebody else changes their mind and agrees, yep, I think that God that I used to believe in isn't real. You take that as confirmation bias towards your predisposition to think that God is fake. Now, I'm not disagreeing with you on whether or not God is likely to be fake or anything else. I'm talking about how we talk to people and what sort of burdens of proof we should adopt. If you'd have gone to your friend and said, you don't understand science and your God's imaginary, and he said, prove it, what would you do? Okay, I'm going to guess that we dropped him. Uh-oh. When I see the call-in studio thing, I see no host connection. Please connect the host. So while we have some callers that are supposedly waiting, we have hit the 6 o'clock time frame, and I'm waiting for a message from the booth. But the point I was trying to get at isn't like, Jim, do you think it's most likely that God, the God most people believe in fact, does not exist?
I think that is more probable than not, that he does not exist.
Yeah. And while I can't do any math on it, I'm pretty much in the same position as well. In much the same way, I view this very similar to my response to the problem of hard solipsism. I can't prove that there are, in fact, other minds. Mm-hmm. But the fact that I have learned things that I did not know means that either I am duplicitous, I'm of two minds, one mind that actually knows everything and is teaching the mind that's acting like it doesn't know, or there's some external mind in like the Descartes cogito, like I'm
right.
Or I know that at least I'm here and real. But the fact that I can learn something that I didn't know suggests very strongly that I am not the only mind in the universe. Can I prove it? No, because I could also be cray. I could be lying to myself or it may be that the thing that I taught myself isn't even true or real, that this is all just gibberish. And I'm both teaching myself something and acting as if the thing that I've been taught is true. Now, that is my similar solution to the God thing.
Yeah.
Do I actually believe that there are no gods? Yes, in almost every possible sense. None of them make any sense with what we witness and experience in the world. None of them are, and the various religions' propositions about God are obviously in conflict with reality and the facts of the world. However, that doesn't mean that if somebody comes to me and says, I have a message for you from God, that I'm justified in saying, your God's fake. I can't prove that. And if I were just to do that, I don't know how that gets us any closer to truth. What that represents is a mind that is closed to the possibility. And I am open to being shown that a God exists. It's just everybody keeps failing to do it.